quick. Where are we working? We're working in the Gospel of Matthew. Gospel of Matthew, chapter 17, verses 1 through 9. What is this? This is literally one of the high points of Jesus' life. So if you want to understand the life of Christ, you know what it is. BLDRA, right? Birth of Christ, life of Christ, death of Christ, resurrection of Christ, and ascension of Christ. Well, this is an L category, the life of Christ. And here's how you think about this. Two bookends. Okay, bookends. At the beginning of Jesus' 3.5-year earthly ministry, he's baptized in the River Jordan. When do we read that? At the beginning of Epiphany. It's Matthew chapter 3, verse 17. That's where we start Epiphany. Now, it's the end of Epiphany, and we end up with the other bookend, which is the story of the Transfiguration. So you want to understand the life of Christ? It's his baptism, the beginning of his ministry. 3.5 years later, it's the end. It's the Transfiguration story, like two bookends like this, okay? So let's go to work on this thing. First of all, let's dive right into the text. So follow along in your text. Now, well, before I do that, let's do this. An easy way to understand this story is through an icon, okay? What are icons? Icons come from the Eastern Orthodox tradition. Now, we don't have time to do a 3-hour comparative religion discussion here, right? We're boring Lutherans, we're Protestant. You ever been to a Catholic church before? Yeah, kind of interesting stuff going on there. We sort of know what it is, but we can't quite figure it out. You know, it's sort of what we do. Well, when you go to an Eastern Orthodox church, all bets are off. You have no idea what's going on, right? A wedding ceremony is like 6 hours long. They got the incense, they got the priests with the weird beards going on, they have all kinds of icons. These are icons all over the place. You're like, what is this? It's kind of like the distinction between the American and National League in baseball. American League has the designated hitter rule, the National League doesn't. You can't quite understand this. What is going on? It's sort of like that. Eastern Orthodox people are Christian, but they developed under a different tradition than we did. We, Lutherans, Protestants, are basically reified Roman Catholics. So we can go to a Catholic church and sort of figure out what's going on. In the Eastern Orthodox world, forget it. It's like you're landing on another planet, okay? So Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Serbian Orthodox, that's another world over there. Well, one of the characteristics of Orthodoxy is they have icons, okay? So here's an icon, right, of the Holy Trinity. Here's one of, it's called the Pantocrator. It's hard to see, but it's Jesus, okay? Here's one of Peter and Paul reconciling, okay? Of course, Peter is the Eastern Orthodox saint. Paul is the other way around. Peter is the Roman Catholic saint. Paul is the Eastern Orthodox saint. So when they reconcile, this is Eastern Orthodoxy and Catholicism getting together, okay? And then this is an icon influenced by Eastern Orthodoxy. It's St. Francis of Assisi, okay? So, all right, so icons are what? Here, and here's the icon that you can't see, right? This is an Eastern Orthodox study Bible. This is an icon of the Transfiguration. Okay, so it's supposed to be gold. That's a color of heaven, and the colors are very important, but I reproduced it on your bulletin cover today. So if you look at your bulletin cover, right, and I know it's basically it's a pattern for a tattoo. You want to go and get that tattoo. Bring that to that tattoo art. They'll understand when you give it to them. They'll flesh it out and make it look good. Okay? So these are, now, can the artist express himself and say, I'm going to put Jesus over on this side and put, no. It's like a schematic. It's very rigid in the icon tradition. Okay? Very rigid. So here. This is a summary of the entire sermon today, right? So the whole thing is there. So let's do the different characters here. Who's in the center? Jesus is always in the center, okay? And who is on the right of Jesus? It's the prophet Elijah. Who's on the left? It's Moses and Peter and John and James. Okay, so this is, and how many? All right, okay. I have too many things to talk about here. All right, so let's go to the text. I'm going to be jumping back onto this, okay? So, ready? So this is like your roadmap for the sermon. All right, let's go. After 6 days, stop. I have a question. Have you heard the number 6 days before? And God created the heaven and the earth in 6 days and rested on the seventh day. 6 is the number of man. 6, number of man. 6 days, after 6 days, well, what happened 6 days before? Remember, when you read the Bible, don't believe me, read the Bible. So this is St. Matthew chapter 17, verse 1. Go up a little bit. Read what happened in chapter 16. In chapter 16 in Matthew, Jesus takes his disciples to the far northern edge of Galilee. It's called Caesarea Philippi, way, way up there. Okay? It's like a retreat in the country. And there Jesus says to the disciples, "Who do men say that I am?" And who talks? Peter. Okay? This is an important thing for today's lesson. Peter is the guy who always opens his mouth. Every single time he says something. Okay? So Peter answers quick. He says, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus is astonished. He figured out. Peter figured out. And he said, "Where did you get this from? Is it from, your opinion, or it must be from the Holy Spirit that gave you this answer?" Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, the Anointed One. Okay? Then Jesus says, "Okay, you got that concept down. Let me go to a higher level concept. I must go to Jerusalem." "Oh, that's good. It's going to be a party in Jerusalem. I must go to Las Vegas." "No, I must go to Jerusalem." Why? To be betrayed. To be handed over to the chief priests and the scribes and the Pharisees and the enemies. And they're going to crucify me. And after 3 days, I'm going to rise again. What does Peter say? "No. Over my dead body? No way, J-Man. I'm not going to let that happen to you." And what does Jesus say? "Get behind me, Satan." So, on the career of Peter, on the resume of Peter, the all-time high point is when he says, "Thou art the Christ," immediately followed by the all-time low point where he tries to prevent Christ from doing his work, which is to go to Jerusalem and die on the cross for our sins. So that works? When did that happen? 6 days before this. Got that? 6 days before. So what does Jesus do? 6 days, after 6 days, he takes Peter and James and John. Okay, Peter is shown here. He's always on the right side. John is always in the center. And James, his real name is Jacob. We missed this, don't we? James is anglicized. His real name is Jacob. Do we know what Jacob in the Old Testament? Jacob wrestles with the angel and receives a new name, Israel. He who strives, or he who wrestles with God. Okay? So, Jacob, yeah, that's pretty neat. Now, how many human beings are on this icon? Yeah, 6, right? 6. 6 is the number of man. 6. Don't go anywhere, because I might talk about the 7th person there or being there. Don't go anywhere, okay? So, who's Peter? We know who Peter is. Mr. Hoof and Mouth Disease Man. Right? And why do we love Peter? Peter says things that you're thinking, but you don't have the guts to say. And that provides Jesus with a teaching moment to help to get it clear in your head. Right? People ask questions. And again, this drives me crazy. When I teach college classes, some kid will ask a question. It's a really good question. And you try to answer the question, and the other kids think that it's time to check their iPhones and have a general discussion. When you go to a conference or a meeting or a class, a formal class, if somebody asks a question, you should write down the answer. Chances are the answer is a teaching moment that's something, it's so important that basically that's the lesson for the whole day. The answer to a question. So that's why we love Peter. So what did Peter do? Well, Peter becomes the leader of the 12 apostles. Peter, he denies Christ 3 times. He's forgiven. His whole amazing career. Maybe about a third of the Bible is devoted to the exploits of Peter. Right? He writes 1st and 2nd Peter. He's a leader in the church, right? So that's Peter. Who's John? You know who John is. James and John are the sons of Zebedee. These are the younger cousins of Jesus. In other words, the parents, Zebedee is the husband, the father, and the wife of Zebedee is the aunt of Jesus. So it's a family. Remember family, clan, tribe stuff in the ancient Near East? So these are relatives of Jesus. What happened to John? This is John. John the evangelist, who wrote what? You know,
Gospel of John, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and the book of Revelation. There are 27 books in the New Testament. John wrote 5 of them. You know what? You could basically take only the 5 books of John and read that, and you can stop right there. That's how much meat is in there. That's how much content is in there. Okay? So John is extremely important. And who's James, or who's Jacob? Who's he? He is the first of the 12 apostles. How many apostles? 12. How many disciples? An unknown number of students. 12 apostles. He's the first of the 12 apostles to be martyred. What do you mean? In the book of Acts it says around 42 AD he was killed by Herod, killed by the sword. First of the martyrs to be killed. Now, is that of interest to you? Oh, not really, it's boring. It doesn't really, Well, Tertullian says the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. If you're reading the Gospel of Matthew back at, 2,000 years ago, you're reading this, maybe your relatives, your uncle or somebody was killed by the Romans. We think about 2.5 million Christians were killed in the early church between, say, 33 AD and 312 AD when the Battle of Milvian Bridge, Constantine I, that took place. So in other words, martyrdom is a really important concept in the early church. For us, it kind of goes in one ear and out the other. We don't really think about that, which is tragic, because the truth is, we have people being killed for the Christian faith like right now. I dare you, go to Nigeria. Yeah, you know what happens in Nigeria? You're in church like this, and the Muslim extremists come and burn down the church with everybody in it. Or in Pakistan, or in India. Christians are being persecuted all over the world, right? So we shouldn't think that just because we have it made, and we can either go to church or not go to church, that we don't have persecution. Well, guess what? The blood of the martyrs is a really important thing. So, a reader of this lesson a couple, hundreds of years ago, you would have focused in on James, not on Peter or John. He's like your saint, okay? So these are the 3 witnesses. Now, what else? Have we seen these 3 before? Yeah. Jairus' daughter dies. So Jesus goes in to Jairus' daughter, and who does he bring with him? Peter, James, John go with him. Remember the Garden of Gethsemane? Yeah, our painting back here by Heinrich Hoffman, back here. Okay? In the Garden of Gethsemane, he takes the 3, Peter, James, and John, to be with him while he prays in the Garden of Gethsemane on Maundy, Thursday. So this is like an inner circle, okay? Peter, James, and John. What does he do? He brings them to a high mountain apart. Stop. What mountain? All right, now, here's where it gets delicious. We think it's Mount Tabor. What is Mount Tabor? Mount Tabor is 1,800 feet above sea level, and the valley floor below is essentially sea level. So it's a mountain that's like weird. It's like just kind of plopped down in the middle of this plain. And what's odd about it, this is Nazareth where Jesus lives. You look over there about 5 or 6 or 7 miles, that's Mount Tabor right there. You can literally see Mount Tabor from Nazareth, especially a certain cliff on the edge of Nazareth. That's the place where the people of Nazareth took Jesus. They drove him out of the synagogue, and they were going to throw him off the cliff and stone him to death. From that cliff, you can see Mount Tabor. Ooh. It gives me the chills just thinking about it. So that cliff right over there, that's Mount Tabor. How do you get up to the top of it? You walk it, right? You walk up there, and it's a hard climb. Today, because we have it made, you pay a Bedouin driver to drive the van up a snake-like road to get to the top. What do? They smoke cigarettes. They listen to like Arab music, like Arab rap music on the radio. There's like beads hanging down. He drives 80 miles an hour. I had my own nearer to God experience riding up to the hill. Isn't that true, Nancy? They're like smoking the cigarette like this, like driving like this, right? You're zipping back and forth, and you're like, ah! Right? Yeah, it's a religious thing. It's a religious thing, right? Okay, so that's that Mount Tabor. And when you get to the top of it, they have a Catholic church and an Eastern Orthodox church on top of the hill, and there you can go there and pray, and you can see an image of Elijah and Elizabeth and an image of Moses. So it's a very important event. So Mount Tabor, that's the mountain. And they're apart. So they go by themselves and they hike up the hill. Along the way, they would have talked. Now,
And what happened there? And there, Jesus was transfigured before them, right? And the details are, his face shined like the sun and his raiment became white as light. Okay, stop. See that word transformed, transfiguration? What is it? In Greek, it's metamorphone. Metamorphosis? You ever look at a caterpillar before? How's that possible? A caterpillar metamorphizes into a beautiful butterfly. If you look at a butterfly and look at a caterpillar, you're like, well, how can those two be related? It's almost like a tadpole and a frog. How is that possible? Metamorphosis. Now, this, it's written in Koine Greek, it's translated into English. So we read the Bible, what's the problem here? You're trying to explain a metaphysical, supernatural event using physical English and Greek words. Our words don't work. You can find the most gifted poet in the world, the best rap star you've ever heard of before. They would have a hard time articulating this event. So our words break down. So Luke, he tries it. He says, here's what happened. Well, his face shined like the sun. That's a metaphor. What does the sun look like? We have a clear day today. Maybe you can spend the afternoon like staring at the sun for a while. See what happens to you. Right? It's the brightest light you could possibly imagine. Okay? His face is shining like the sun. Right? And how about his clothes? They became dazzling white. Now, we have laundry commercials and, between the pharmaceutical ads and the, buy the new car, the bleaching your clothes white is a big thing. In the ancient world, did they have this? Nah. Everybody's clothes are kind of like dirt color. So someone who had dazzling white clothes, this would be an impressive sight to see. So words are breaking down. And Moses, I'm getting ahead of the story, our first reading that Bobby read, and I must admit, Bobby, you sound good on the PA system there. You sound nice. You sound so nice on there. I can't believe it. I hardly know that it's you, right? Now, so Moses goes up on Mount Sinai. What happens? He gets illuminated. Why? Profane, holy. Holy, profane. When profane things meet the holiness of God, things explode. Okay? Moses is up on Mount Sinai, profane, and he meets the holiness of God, and he comes back down the hill, and his face is radiated and illuminated. Right? It's a reflection of the glory of God. However, in this case, the light of God is coming not from the outside in, like with Moses. No, it's better than Moses. It's from the inside out. The sun generates its own light, doesn't it? His face is like the sun. He's shining out, not being shined in like Yahweh and Moses on Mount Sinai. That's a theme, right? What's Matthew about? He's the new Moses. Jesus is the new Moses, right? The new Exodus event. That's another theme, right? The new Mount Sinai. Where's the Sermon on the Mount? Matthew 5, 6, and 7, right? Okay? He says, I am not here to abolish the law and the prophets, but to fulfill. He gives the Sermon on the Mount. So Mount Sinai and the Mount of Transfiguration and the Sermon on the Mountain. Okay? Extremely important connecting these dots. So he's a new Moses, right? Okay, so his face is shining. Now, stop. We must talk about this for a second. Do we know any other places where there's white garments illuminated like light? Yeah. When they go to the empty tomb. Who went to the empty tomb? Well, we know about Mary Magdalene and Martha and all that, but later on, the boys went. What boys? Peter and John went to the tomb. And when they get to the tomb, they look in, and the place where they laid the body had two men in dazzling white apparel, angels. And they said, he's not here, he's risen. So this is a deliberate connection to what's coming down the pike on Easter Sunday morning. Okay? Dazzling white. Okay? So, and there appeared, right? So you got this now. They go up the hill, they're alone, Peter, James, and John, and Jesus. All of a sudden, Jesus is, boom, he's lit up. Then, can you top that? Yeah, you can. Two men appear. And who are they? Moses and Elijah. And what are they doing? They're talking to Jesus. Stop, stop, and stop. First, who are the two men? Elijah and Moses are talking to Jesus. Let's do who they are first. Who's Elijah? These are, Elijah and Moses are called the deathless men. Yeah. Who dies in the Bible? Everybody dies in the Bible. We live here among 1,000 people that are buried here. Okay? So is it appointed for man once to die, and after comes the judgment? We all die. We're all born, we all live, we all die. Except for who? The prophet Enoch. He lived 365 years back in the days of Noah, and he was taken up into heaven. He didn't die. Who else didn't die? The prophet Elijah. He didn't die. He's taken up into heaven. Who else didn't die? Moses. That's a legend, though. At the end of the book of Deuteronomy in the Torah, it says that God took Moses and he died and he's buried in the desert somewhere that no one knows. Why is that? So we don't go to the Moses shrine. But the legend, the urban legend, religious legend, the 1st century AD, Moses didn't really die. He was taken up into heaven. He's a deathless one. So Enoch, Elijah, and Moses are the 3 deathless ones. Okay? So what are they doing? Talking to Jesus. Ready? I am not here to abolish the law and the prophets, but to fulfill. They're talking. Okay? And what would they have said? Moses would have said something like, Jesus, I knew that you were coming, because in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 15 and 19, it says that it's a prophecy, messianic prophecy. One day God will send someone like me, a new Moses, who's going to be a prophet. You are that prophet. The prophet Elijah, he represents all the prophets of the Old Testament. In fact, I forgot this. The Old Testament is 39 books, right? You can break it into 2 big chunks. The law and the prophets. The law and the prophets. So Moses is Mr. Law. That's what he's doing, holding the book in the icon. He's an old guy holding a book. This is Elijah. He's the father or the spokesman for all the prophets of the Old Testament. That means the 333 messianic prophecies that point out who Jesus is. So Elijah would have said, yeah, that's what my boys were talking about all those centuries. They were talking about the coming of the Messiah, and you're the Messiah. See how this works? So Moses and Elijah. Now, the 2 deathless ones. Now, so here's the story. Here it is. Now, what does this require? Of course, it requires a commentary from the spin artist and expert Peter. He's got a comment. You can't just leave this alone and go, wow, this is a God thing. Let me savor the moment. Oh no, I must have an editorial comment. So what does Peter say? He says to Jesus, Lord, it's good to be here. Right? That's probably a pretty good thing. It's one of the most amazing events in world history. You get to stand here and see Jesus, the Son of God, talking to Moses and Elijah, 2 people that never died. So Moses, the Exodus event is 1446 BC. So we think he died around 1406 BC or was taken up into heaven. The prophet Elijah is about 700 or 800, maybe 900 BC. So these 2 guys have been dead for like 900 to 1,500 years, and they're talking to Jesus. Yeah, Dad, it's good to be here, right? So, but wait, there's more. Peter is he's like a walking, talking Ginzu knife commercial. For $19.95, you could double your order. Here's what he says. Let me build 3 tabernacles or booths. One for Jesus, one for Moses, one for Elijah. What is this all about? I don't know. Here's what it's about. Ready? We all have Jewish friends and neighbors. What's the big Jewish holiday? Passover. Okay? Well, one of the 3 major required holidays is the festival of booths or tabernacles. What does that mean? Well, if you're an observant Jew, you're supposed to build a hut in the backyard out of sticks. And you're supposed to have your sleep out there with your children. Eventually, after a couple of days, the kid's going to say, how come we're sleeping outside? Well, I'm glad you asked that story, because we are commemorating the wilderness wandering, where we lived in the wilderness for 40 years in huts like this. It also celebrates the giving of the Torah to the Jewish people. Is that a big deal? It's like Constitution Day in the United States or something. Okay? Giving of the Torah, living in the huts. Peter says, let's build 3 tabernacles or 3 booths here. There's a link to the Jewish holiday, okay? Again, what is Peter trying to do? He's trying to freeze the moment. Are you supposed to come to church? Yeah, that's good to come to church. Is that where your religion ends? No, you come here to get a recharge. You go up the mountain to be with Jesus, you take communion, you're with him, so you can go down the hill and get back into the good fight. So this is the recharge station. You know, like at the Rhinebeck library, they have the place where you plug in your electric car, but no one ever uses it, but they have it there, the electric car charge station. That's what a church is, right? You get charged up to go out and to face the world, okay? So you're not supposed to live on the mountain, you're supposed to get out to the trenches where people are, okay? So Peter's yapping, you know, he's like yapping up, right? So who's talking? Man is talking, Peter is talking. Then what happens? While Peter's yapping on, suddenly a bright cloud overshadows them. Okay, stop. In the Bible, whenever a bright cloud comes down, a bright cloud is what Moses encountered on Mount Sinai. He goes up on Mount Sinai. What happened? Profane, holy, boom. You have thunder, lightning, earthquakes, all kinds of funky stuff going on, because holy and profane aren't supposed to meet. Now, when they do, electricity, bad things happen. Atomic bombs go off, okay? So the people standing at the bottom of the hill are watching this, and in order to protect the people at the bottom of the hill from the absolute holiness of God, God brings down a cloud, a veil, to protect us. It's like wearing a welding mask when you're welding. For your own protection, you wear a welding mask. That's what a cloud is. So whenever you see a cloud, that means it's the presence of God. It's called a theophany, an appearance of God. So a cloud comes down, that means Yahweh is here. So Peter is yapping, man speaks, man says, God says. Man says, God says. So while Peter is spouting gibberish and gobbledygook, God says, here's the cloud for you. Here's the voice from the cloud. And what did the voice from the cloud say? This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Stop. Have we ever heard that before? Yeah. Bookend, bookend. When he's baptized, the voice from the cloud, the voice from heaven said, this is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. What is that? It means this. It's the seal of approval, the sanction. That Jesus is not some religious lunatic, and we have a lot of them roaming around, don't we? Down through the centuries. He's not some self-appointed guy. No, he's got the sanction of Yahweh, God the Father, saying, this is my Son, with whom I am well pleased. In other words, I approve of him at the beginning of his ministry. 3.5 years later, the final exam, I approve of him. Bookend, bookend. If you have any doubts about God, don't believe the babblings of Peter, word of man. It's kind of interesting, but it's kind of crazy. Believe what God says. This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. If Jesus is the Son of God, maybe you should pay attention to his birth, his life, his death, his resurrection, his ascension. Yeah, maybe you should focus on that. Very, very interesting. But wait, is that the end of what God said? Not ready? This is not in the baptism, but it's in this. It's an exact quote, except for this very end. It says, listen to him. Listen to him. Is that a hard thing? Yeah, because I like to talk. I like to spout nonsense. I like to share my interesting opinions on things, especially on Facebook, where I like to spout. Are you supposed to listen to your opinions? A Christian, you need to anchor your faith in the Word of God. Listen to him. Listen to him. You mean the one who said, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Yeah, that's the one you're supposed to listen to. Listen to him. Lent's coming up. That's a good time maybe to listen to what God might have to say. Very, very interesting. Listen to him. Right? Now, When the disciples heard it, what happened to them? This is my face. My face goes on the ground. You lick the dust. That's what happens when profane and holy meet. You don't stand there and go, oh yeah, God is sort of like George Burns in that John Denver movie. Remember that one? Oh God, remember that movie? Oh, he's like an old guy, uttering Jewish witticisms, smoking a cigar. Oh, God is so cute, Maybe he sits on a rhinestone throne like Liberace with a big white beard or something. He's kind of a cuddly God. No, the God of the Old Testament is an awesome God that takes your breath away. That's why they make depend undergarments for you when you're in the presence of God. I'm serious about this. God is so awesome that you think you're going to die when you're in his presence. He's not something you can approach and, oh, isn't he cute or something? No, he's awesome. He's so awesome that these three, they're shown in the icons laying on the ground. They're blown away by the holiness of God. Right? They're laying on the ground. And what is it? They're on their face and they're sore afraid. They're very afraid. Remember, in the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, when an angel appears to you, Gabriel, the first word is what? Fear not. No phobos. Well, that's the correct response. They're on the ground. Why? They think they're going to die. They're going to be like imploded by the holiness, the light, the awesome power of God. And what happens then? Jesus comes. So he approaches them. Notice, Jesus is higher than Elijah and Moses. Okay? He comes down to them. And what does he do? He touches them. He grabs them like this. He goes, arise, arise. You're not supposed to pull back, Robert. Obviously, I'm not Jesus. So he grabs and he says, arise, and pulls them up. Arise. Now, is Jesus touching people something rather interesting? What does Jesus do? Jairus' daughter. He goes into her room and he touches her. You see, religious men are not supposed to touch the dead. Religious men are not supposed to touch lepers. Religious men are supposed to be separated from the profane world because they're holy people. Jesus touches them and he says, get up and arise. Do not be afraid. How do we understand the absolute holiness of God? The connecting point, the touch spot, right? The Holy Trinity, it's this. Jesus is the apex, the point of the Holy Trinity. We're this way, trying to get to God. Jesus is the apex point of the Holy Trinity. You touch God through touching Jesus. You touch God by believing in Jesus. You touch God through Christ alone. Extremely important, right? And so then they lift up their eyes. Okay? So they're on the ground like this. And they look up, and here's Jesus who touches them and raises them up. He touches them. And when they lift up their eyes, what do they see? They don't see the cloud. They don't see Elijah. They don't see Moses. They don't hear the voice of God from heaven. They see Jesus alone and him only. What does the text say exactly? It's redundant, isn't it? It says, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. They're emphasizing the fact that it's solus Christus, Christ alone. We are saved by grace through faith in Christ, not by works of the law. You're not saved by being a religious or a moral or an ethical person. You're saved by faith in who? Jesus alone, Christ alone, solus Christus. They looked up and they saw him alone. That's why Transfiguration is a major event in the life of Christ. This is a huge deal. It all comes together. Now, they're walking down the hill after this is over. I don't know about you. I'd probably have to go get some counseling and therapy after an event like this. They're walking down the hill. Now, what are they doing? When they walk, they talk. It's called the peripatetic method. This is what Aristotle used to teach his students, walking around. Okay? And on campus today, what do kids do? 3 or 4 friends, they're really good friends. They're walking along and they're all texting and talking to their other friends on their iPhone. It's like, put down the phone. Talk to the person next to you. It's a living person with a pulse. It's a good thing to have an actual human relation, right? So when they walk down the hill, they talk to Jesus. Peripatetic men. They're walking down the hill talking, right? And what does Jesus say? He gives them one more word of instruction. He says, tell no one about this vision, about this episode. Don't tell anybody. Keep it among us. Silence. Silencia. Silence. Peter, James, John, keep your big mouth shut. Especially you, Pete. I know you have a tendency to rant on. Why? Keep it quiet until after, when? Until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. Why is that? We don't understand Christ. How do you understand Jesus? Oh, it's the transfiguration moment. The glory. Yeah, that's what we all want. Well, yeah, keep him on the mountaintop. Let's stay up there. Illuminated Jesus. We like the electric Jesus, right? That's not how you think of Christ. It's not the glory, it's the gory. You understand Christ. Where are we going? Ash Wednesday, 40 days of Lent. We're going to Maundy Thursday, the night in which he was betrayed. We're going to Good Friday, the day that he died on the cross for our sins. He's placed in a rich man's tomb. Easter Sunday morning, when Peter and John go to the empty tomb, then they understood. You can't understand the transfiguration unless you're in the tomb and look through the empty tomb and out and beyond to this event. This event is not meant to stand alone. This event is the beginning of the descent down the hill from Mount Tabor to Jerusalem, to his betrayal, to his death, his burial, his resurrection. Remember, you can't just pick out the parts of Jesus that you like. I like the Sermon on the Mount Jesus, turn the other cheek. No, you have to go for the whole Jesus. And that means the death, the burial, and the resurrection. So they don't understand. They wouldn't understand what this is all about until the events of Easter Sunday morning. Even then, Peter's a slow learner. It takes him a while to get it, but once he does get it, he writes something like 2 Peter that Bobby read. 2 Peter, old man Peter. He's an old guy. He's on death row, and he's looking back at his life, and what does he think about? The day that I was at the Mount of Transfiguration. This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. Peter remembers, he recalls it, and today is Transfiguration Sunday. We need to think about that too. Amen.